In the previous few presentations, we have had an introduction to the concept of discourse analysis in social sciences and the general process of discourse analysis with a focus on the role of language in the socio-political dynamics in a society. The current presentation is aimed at a brief description of the possible strengths and shortcomings of discourse analysis. So first of all, let us have a revisit to the definition of discourse analysis. So as I discussed in the previous presentations, in a broader sense, discourse analysis is an examination of the discourse, and that actually means an examination of the verbal communication or the use of language as a socio-cultural, socio-political practice by a group of people. The general philosophy of discourse analysis is that language shapes and is shaped by the social contexts and the social relationships. The scope of discourse analysis is quite diverse, and it includes several fields such as the field of education, the medical field, political discourse, political field, gender, and so on. So in each of these, the discourse analysis will be focused on the specific discourses in each of these areas. Now, generally, like other research methods in social sciences, discourse analysis has its strengths and its possible shortcomings. So, when it comes to the strengths of discourse analysis, the first one is that it helps in the identification of and insights into power dynamics in a society. So, how is actually power represented in a society, especially how is it represented in the use of through the use of language? How is power distributed? What is the impact of power distribution on the use of language and vice versa? Similarly, the other strength of discourse analysis is that it helps us in understanding language and its the nuances of or the complexities of the use of language in particular cultural or political contexts. Thirdly, it helps us in developing insight into the use of language in terms of the meaning construction and the meaning manipulation. Fourthly, it highlights language as a representative of the socio-cultural phenomena. And further, the discourse analysis helps us in uncovering hidden agendas using language and rhetoric. So as we know that in many cases, for example, if we take the example of the field of politics, we know that politicians make use of language in order to spread their agendas, and in many cases, that agenda comes as a hidden agenda that is covered through the particular use or rhetoric of language. So that is something that the discourse analysis helps us in highlighting and pointing out the hidden agendas that is actually the behind the use of language. Then building of deeper understanding of the use of language in the creation of socio-political reality. So in many cases, language represents socio-political realities, but in many cases, language is used in order to develop, to shape perceptions and to create socio-political realities. And so we can say that discourse analysis helps us in understanding the procreative role of language in terms of developing, shaping, creating, changing socio-political realities. And lastly, the strength, this is also an important strength of the discourse analysis, that it helps us in developing a deeper understanding of the world around us, especially the world that is represented through the use of language, through communication, is something that is pretty much around us. And discourse analysis helps us in understanding, in actually developing deeper understanding of the world around us by dismantling, by analyzing the language that is used as a representative of the world around us. Then, like other types of research, discourse analysis has certain shortcomings. So, for example, the first one is that there is generally an overemphasis, there is a possibility of an overemphasis on the power connotation or interpretation of language. So in many cases, especially discourse analysis, the critical discourse analysts have a focus of power or language as a representative of the power structures in the society. And so an overemphasis in that sense can perhaps obscure the other uses of language, the more mundane communicative approaches to and communicative objectives of language. So that's the first thing that we need to be careful about. Secondly, there is an overemphasis often on language or text and vocabulary rather than the message or the factors behind it. This is especially when the focus is on a more descriptive level of the language rather than a more critical and contextual understanding of the language, the vocabulary, the structure that is used. There is also the possibility of misinterpretation or overinterpretation. So in many cases, it can happen that the discourse analysts misinterpret the particular use of language or the vocabulary or the structure. Or in other cases, it can also happen that there is overinterpretation of the particular use of language. For example, the language used in political discourse, such as in political speeches. So that can also happen. Then, as we know that it is qualitative study, qualitative approach to research, and like other qualitative researches, there is the possibility of limited scope for generalization. So that can also be considered as one of the shortcoming. There is also the possibility of researcher bias that we need to be careful about when we are conducting this type of research or when we are analyzing or critiquing such type of research. And lastly, there could be validity, reliability, and authenticity issues, especially when there is element of researcher bias, or when there are issues in terms of designing the research process, or in terms of developing the research objectives, or in terms of the sample selection, and also in terms of data analysis. So we need to be careful about that. That the discourse analysis research is designed well, it is executed well, and when it is the data is analyzed and interpreted, the process is valid and authentic.